We spoke with one of Connecticut's top education officials about the conversations happening right now with confusion over the Department of Education's role and President-elect Trump's promise to dismantle it. Plus, on the heels of yet another Connecticut resident now being appointed as the new leader of that federal office, we brought your questions to Kate Diaz, president of the Connecticut Education Association.
Connecticut receives about $1 billion in aid from the federal government, and that gets dispersed among many, many programs. Programs as straightforward as, free and reduced lunch programs, right? Our meal programs are federally funded. We also receive federal funding to support some of our students who are living within poverty. So we do get support in those aspects. We get federal funding for students with disabilities. So to be able to provide services to the 95% of our students that have special education needs are in public education. Head Start, so getting our students off on the right foot. Absolutely federally funded program. And often people forget that something as straightforward, again, as FAFSA is administered by the Department of Education. And so when we talk in the broad landscape of the many touch points of the Department of Education, it really goes pre-K through college. And there is not a family in Connecticut or across the country that isn't impacted in some way, shape, or form by the Department of Education. And so there's a lot of other kind of programming in terms of setting, our standards and expectations around assessment, around Title IX, and sort of what does equity look like in our school systems. So there are policy pieces, but really the significant factor is all of the federal funding. I'm always really anxious when we talk about things like, getting rid of the department, because one, that's $1 billion. That the state of Connecticut has to figure out. And let's say best case scenario, right? Let's say they go, we're getting out of the business of education, but we're still going to send Connecticut $1 billion, right? So if all of a sudden our State Department had the responsibility of working through $1 billion of distributions, that would be an enormous task for us to take on. Now, that is our best case scenario, right? Like we go down the road and we don't have any loss of that financial income to our state. However, what I think we're really kind of pondering is, what does a change of policy linked to federal funding look like? We are a state that has embraced our undocumented students, those who are still working on their citizenship, because we recognize that the children in those circumstances never made any choice. They are here. And we want to take care. We do want to take care of them. If we have a federal policy shift that says, if you provide services to individuals in this case, or if you don't roll back some of the Title IX protections that we've kind of embraced, then you could have a loss of federal funds. Those are interesting conversations, because Connecticut would really have to then dive in and go, okay, how do we balance this? How do we balance the social interests with the economic interests?
Speaking of funding, we know that even before the COVID-19 pandemic, when we did see temporary boosts in grants and federal education funding, that it has been on the decline for a while now. We spoke a few months ago on Real Story with our congressional delegation, who says it's been more of a fight than ever to toe the line on education budget-wise. What are those conversations for you looking like now, especially post-election here?
Well, I think we're really talking to our federal and honestly our state legislators as well about the important investment in education, and that is not simply about teachers and students in this moment. It's really about, what does the future, both, kind of as a community and as an economy, look like? Because really education is a foundational aspect of so many pieces of our life. It's about having an educated citizenry. It's about services and opportunity, but it's also about economic growth and development. And so we need to ensure, in all of sort of the conversations and the potential chaos, is that we really do protect the system of public education. It is the system that allows us to grow a workforce, that allows us to build and allows us to be vibrant. If we really kind of don't seek to protect that institution of public education, we end up in some real challenging spaces. And my biggest concern in all of this is that if we see a shift of federal dollars, kind of held back if we're not compliant, I can see a world in which the Department of Education says, hey, Florida, love what you're doing. Here's all your money. Connecticut, I need you to hit these marks or we're going to hold back federal funding.
We know that obviously this has been a part of the campaign. There have been conversations about holding back funding from states that have curriculum which doesn't fit into, President-elect Trump's agenda. What does CEA, have to say about abiding to these directions or loss of funding? Because we know that is a really hard balance to even have to consider.
Well, in honesty, I think we have to be honest about what we believe public education should do. And we need to hold true to that. Now, some of the things that people are fighting against are fiction, right? Things that aren't actually happening in our school systems. So, when I see, for example, that, the threat of if you're teaching CRT, right, critical race theory, then we're not going to provide support. Well, I'm happy to report nobody in the state of Connecticut in our K-12 system teaches CRT, right? We've addressed this for years, talking through the fact that teaching about different experiences for our different cultures is not CRT. That's understanding the world around you. That is not a critical race theory program. That is an opportunity to learn about other cultures and societies. We've been doing that as a part of education since education began. And so, some of this is rhetoric versus real policy. And to some extent, I'm hesitant to get too deep in those weeds in this, because I don't know what they're really going to be able to do. And the lens with which they make those judgment calls, right? If they defined CRT as anything that talks about any ethnicity, then everybody in the country is in trouble because we are a melting pot society. So I don't know how you talk about American history without talking about multiple cultures and societies, right? But, that is something we'll have to tackle. Realistically, if that comes about, CEA would be strongly against the manipulation of student learning to meet a political agenda. That is just not an acceptable use of a public education system. A free, open public education should allow students to see a breadth of ideas and develop their own identity and thinking around those things. It is not our job to limit what they can see and hear so that they are forced to only have one perspective. And so we would be strongly against anything that started to politically manipulate our curriculum.
And is there anything that CEA is doing now to, in some way, shape, or form prepare for those sort of possibilities? Because obviously no one has a crystal ball, there's no way to predict the future, but we are seeing these signs and things that have been directly said by President-elect Trump and those, on his transition team. So is there any way that you're sort of taking any sort of steps to prepare now, and what does that look like?
So we're honestly looking at what are the board policies, because at the end of the day, boards of education have a lot of power to decide what goes on in our schools. We're really turning and looking to our local communities and saying, where are our values, where are our beliefs, and what are we prepared to toe the line on? And we are looking at our board policies. We're looking at our contracts, our agreements, and where are the things that kind of outline, what are the published curriculum that we have already as communities agreed to. I strongly believe that the best defense against sort of broad, kind of huge mandate types of things are getting in the room with the real people who have to execute those changes, have to actually teach, and whose families are impacted by these decisions. Because in that space, we have a lot of common ground. A lot of this is about returning to what we know best, which is our local communities, ensuring that lines of communication are open, that our boards of education are well informed about curriculum, what we're doing, why we're doing it, They have voted on the curriculum. They are engaged in that and making sure that we are transparent about the work going on in schools.
Would be remiss for not mentioning that our current education secretary, Miguel Cardona, is from Connecticut. Obviously, this past week we saw the announcement of another Connecticut resident, but not someone with as much educational experience. Linda McMahon announced as Trump's pick. How important has the direct relationship been for Connecticut with the conversations that are happening down in DC and with the head of the Department of Education?
So we've enjoyed a lot of communication with Secretary Cardona, and I think that's just that his roots are here. He loves Connecticut. He's often here. His children are here. His daughter is going to be a teacher. He is absolutely ingrained into the Connecticut culture. So he has been a really great asset for us to be able to have conversations, to get clarity when there's things going on that we don't understand, to be able to communicate about things that are important, in our state as well. This pick of Linda McMahon is an interesting choice. It certainly does not suggest that there's a high level of respect for the work that goes on in the school systems, because she doesn't know anything about that. She has absolutely no experience with school systems, with children in schools. And, I think that it's unfortunate that we're sitting in a space where the person who's going to lead some of the most important programs we offer to some of our most vulnerable children knows nothing about those things. Having said that, I try to be an optimist and have an open mind. And so my hope in all of this is that Linda McMahon goes to her Connecticut roots, understands the power of our education system. It has served her children well. So trust the educators, have conversations with them, include them, listen for the advice of the people who are in these systems, because it would be a real tragedy if at the end of her tenure, the system was worse for wear. And so some of this has to be about her choice of what her legacy will be.
That's all the time we have this morning. As always, more of our exclusive conversations online and on the free Fox 61 News app. And you can find our continuous coverage there under the Real Story tab. As always, stay informed and stay engaged. Have a great morning.